The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
Siege, the Battle of Ontario, well underway. We watched Game 1 of that series at the Scotiabank Arena on Sunday evening. The Leafs taking a 1-0 series lead. They took it to Ottawa. I know the Sens will say they looked good at 5-on-5, but that power play for the Leafs, getting the chances they got, the physicality, there were a lot of things that went Toronto's way.
There were, and I think, we saw a lot of the inexperience in the Senators too. And it's one thing to talk about it. Obviously, it was discussed heading into the series. I know the players and Travis Green, the coach, were asked about it, but it's another thing to live it, right? The emotions in a game like that really are not like what you experienced during the regular season. Scotiabank Arena takes its knocks for being a bit of a library at times, but it was rocking last night. And, obviously when the Leafs get a lead and play with a lead and all the things that happen, I mean, it's a tough environment to play in. And so I think that the Senators at times lost their composure, and probably did some things that strayed from the game plan. As you mentioned, though, when you sift through the loss, I don't think that certainly not all is not lost here, I guess would be the way I would frame things. I mean, there's no good in starting a series with a 6-2 loss, except for the fact it starts 0-0 when you play on Tuesday in Game 2, and the circumstances are likely to be different in that game. So, it was a fun night in the arena. You starting already, like there was not maybe one incident that sparked it. I mean, you might argue, I guess, the Ridley Gregg cross-check on Tavares or him sliding into Stolarz towards the end of the game, how you viewed that, some other plays. But I'm already sensing a little bit of the boil coming up, which is, another part of, I think, what made the playoffs so special. And I think what made people excited about this series when the Leafs and the Senators were lined up to play each other.
You mentioned Ridley Gregg. You reported earlier on Monday, no supplemental discipline to come for Ridley. It looked really interesting in the moment. On the replay, it looked really high. It looked like maybe it got Tavares in the face. Then you realize, no, it kind of got him in the shoulder. Then there was a review in the moment. It looked like it was going to be 5 minutes. It gets downgraded to 2. What did you think about how that all developed? And was it the right call for no further discipline to be added?
Well, I'll put it this way. The Leafs didn't expect it to even be a suspension, but Craig Berube did walk off the podium after doing his media on Sunday night and said, "Call the league." So somebody had to call the league and check. I think ultimately, Ridley Gregg is someone who is already to a degree under the Leafs' skin. A lot of talk about him here on the day between games on Monday. Matthew Nyes, for example, calling him annoying or that play annoying and saying that he's someone that they're going to play hard between the whistles. I think, one thing Toronto is trying hard to do, and we'll see if they're successful, is to sort of turn another cheek to some of this stuff. I think the Senators, in a lot of ways, are built to agitate a bit more. I think when you look at even a guy like David Perron in his career has been known for that. Obviously, Brady Tkachuk, we spent time discussing. You got Greg. I just think that there's players on that side that are going to try to get the Leafs off their game by retaliating and drawing penalties, something Ottawa did very well throughout the regular season. Didn't work so well in Game 1, where they only got 2 power plays compared to the 6 power plays they gave Toronto. But in terms of this play itself, it's hard to quibble with it. I mean, this is the way it's supposed to work. If you call a major penalty, the referees do have the ability to review it on tape. They reduced that penalty in the moment. The Leafs still scored on the minors. So, I think that probably one thing they're saying in the Leafs room around all of this stuff is one way to keep making them pay is if they're going to take penalties to score power play goals. Probably the most painful thing of it all you can do right now. Well, there might be something inside you, something human that wants to maybe deliver a slash or a punch or something like that it's probably better to get back that way. But, this to me, the emotion in the series and how both sides navigate the line, and maybe some of the gray that exists in the playoffs will be an interesting subplot to the series. And certainly Greg, I thought he was a menace in that game, and I say that as a compliment, quite frankly. I mean, he scored one of Ottawa's 2 goals, had some moments. Certainly, you could tell maybe I don't know if it's the history going all the way back to that slap shot goal into the empty net or just maybe the way he plays more broadly. But certainly he seems to be a number that's been circled in the Leafs room, and everyone's pretty aware of what he's doing out there.
I remember I spoke to Ridley a couple days ago about that moment from last season where he shot the puck into the open net, and he's doing everything he can to, distance himself from that, get past it. Obviously, in the moment, he blacked out. It was incredible for him to experience. And Michael Andlauer, the Sens owner, also told me that that was his favorite moment from last year. So there was no way we were going to enter this series without that kind of hovering over both teams' heads. But for Ridley to kind of continue that momentum on into this series with the way that he's been agitating, that has definitely been very fascinating to watch. I'm also looking out, obviously, for how Tim Stützle played too. And I think he got about 7 or 8 hits in that game. He threw the first big hit of the game against the Leafs. I mean, Brady Tkachuk, obviously, we expected him to be this X factor. I thought he was a little bit more nondescript compared to what Ridley was bringing and compared to what Tim Stützle was bringing physically as well. I think the Sens definitely wanted to throw the Leafs off on their game that way. But and to tie back to an earlier point about what you're making about the crowd, the Leafs hit back too. And every time the Leafs hit, it felt like it was a Coliseum in there. I know the reputation is what it is about the Scotiabank Arena, but I give the fans a lot of credit. They were in it from the jump, and they really hyped up their guys yesterday. I was actually really impressed. I've only been there a handful of times. That was the most animated I've heard that crowd.
Yeah, it's what you expect in the playoffs, I'd say. I mean, even talking to Steven Lorentz, Leafs depth player today, he was saying he was still buzzing the next day. Just that was his first experience, playing for the team in the playoffs, and loved the energy that was there. The one thing we should say about Greg that probably gets lost a little bit in the discussion after game one is his line with Pinto and Amadio got a lot of good work done at 5-on-5. And in fact, they were largely going up against the Tavares-Nylander line for Toronto's side of things. Craig Berube did make a switch in game, took Domi off that wing, put Pontus Holmberg with that group. That second line has kind of been a revolving door for Toronto, and it's had some real moments of success. So it's not always being changed because everything is a disaster and it's broken, but it feels unsettled. And because, the Pinto line with Greg on the wing had such an ability, I think, to get good work done at 5-on-5. Toronto's already had to make an in-game adjustment. Again, it doesn't get discussed because there's so much going on in that game. There's a lot of higher level points, but I do think that, that's a real sort of swing line to me for the Senators. We'll see when they get home for game 3, how Travis Green elects to use that group. Wouldn't be surprised at all if they get the Austin Matthews matchup, when there's more control on the Senators bench for that. And so, it's not just the agitating or even just the goal. I think, a lot of good things were happening when that group was on the ice. And if you're on the Ottawa end of this, you're talking about those positives now because, it's sort of self-evident that if they're going to give the Leafs 6 power plays, it's probably not going to be a successful series for Ottawa. I think that's a lot to ask, given the way the Leafs power play has been clicking at about 30% now for the last couple months. A 5-forward unit has really found its groove. And so, they need to win the game at 5-on-5, I think is really the ideal strategy. And, that's a trio, at least in game 1, on a night where we can maybe highlight things that didn't go well that had a big positive for me from the Sens side of it.
I agree. And also, I think with how matchups were being played out throughout that game, if Travis Green has to throw out the Brady Tkachuk, Tim Stützle, Claude Giroux line, I don't think they fared that badly against their top guys either in terms of Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner. Obviously, some defensive mistakes kind of led to some of those goals at 5-on-5, but you're right. The game has to continue for the Sens at 5-on-5 to give themselves a chance. And hearing from them after the game on Sunday, hearing from them on Monday, that came up a lot from Travis Green, from Thomas Chabot, from Stützle. They felt they really played well at 5-on-5. They felt they were able to keep some of their big guns at bay for the most part at that part of the ice. It's just, if when you allow all those power plays, you're going to allow all those chances. And one thing we need to mention too, it's one thing for the Sens to allow those chances on the power play. Consider how fast those opportunities came. Like John Tavares scoring within 5 seconds, maybe less. William Nylander's power play goal, I'm still thinking about it. Dude did a brilliant job just driving towards the slot. Austin Matthews is ready for the slap shot. Jake Sanderson, if you look at how he's defending, he's clearly waiting for that one-timer. And then William Nylander takes advantage of the space and then scores. I have to give them credit. They exploited the defense that way. And on the power play, I think the Leafs deserve a lot of credit with how they've done it, which compared to last year, a complete 180 from what their entire experience was with the man advantage.
Yeah, and the start of this season too. They made a change in the offseason. Mark Savard was brought in as the assistant coach with the power play duties in Toronto, and it did not start well. I mean, for not just like 3 games, 5 games, like it was a long period at the start of the year. And if somewhere in January where they kind of went full time to 5 forwards on the top unit, and they've been cooking with gas ever since. I think one thing that's worked well, and you can't blame Sanderson if you're defending in that position. Of course, you want to be guarding and doing what you can for Matthews, one time or shot. But I think at times he's almost been a decoy. I mean, the Leafs power play is a lot more than just running through Austin Matthews, who, clearly has one of the best individual shots in the league. When he gets a look, he's a good bet to beat a goaltender. But, they score a lot of greasy goals, like the Nyes goal they had in that game right at the crease. Obviously, Tavares had the high tip and finished his own rebound. But, this is one thing that makes that power play, I think, probably so ridiculous, is that it's not like you can just take away one facet and it's done. I think it has a lot of different looks and a lot of different options. And so, there's always a sort of cat and mouse game that goes on with these sorts of things. I'm sure someone will find a way to stymie it, but they've had a long run of success here. They're feeling confident. I think from the Leafs end of it, it's important that those guys get their names on the score sheet. It just relieves some of the pressure that's always there for them in the playoffs. It maybe keeps some of the storylines from the past at bay a little longer, although those are coming. Don't worry. No matter what happens, you can just, no player, or rarely does a player go through the playoffs and just put up 2-3 points a game. I mean, we basically saw that from Draisaitl and McDavid a couple times. With a hat tip also, McKinnon and Rantanen during their days in Colorado had some pretty monster runs. But, by and large, even the teams that win a cup, you have to get by sometimes without your top guys producing. So, it was as good. I would say that's as perfect a night if you're the Leafs that you could draw up, just given some of the past. They got the lead, they took the lead, they capitalized on some breakdowns. Anthony Stolarz looked very good in the Leafs crease in his very first playoff start. They came out of it healthy as far as we can tell. I mean, basically anything you can look at. That's only the third time in 10 game ones that they've played in this era that they've won the game one. And so they've been behind the 8 ball in those series. And while they pushed a lot of them to game 7, I think just to exert themselves in the matchup has them feeling good. But now, Ottawa can still lean into the underdog role. I would stick to this, even if somehow the Sens lose game 2, going home, you still stick to that. I mean, it can be a race to 4 in a sense. And so, one team's feeling really good. One team's probably going back to the drawing board a little bit here. But I can't wait for game 2.
I can't wait for game 2 either. I still think if the Sens remain disciplined, they have a good shot to split this after 2 games. You mentioned Anthony Stolarz. I thought he was excellent for the Toronto Maple Leafs with a really great goaltending performance. Would like to know from your vantage point how crucial his performance was to the victory, and also contrast that with Linus Ullmark on the other end for the Ottawa Senators, where I didn't like his game as much. I know the defense probably could have been a little bit better, but I thought for an opening game to this series, he's the definitive number 1 guy. They're going to pay him all this money with his extension coming up next year. I wasn't too crazy about how he played against the Maple Leafs yesterday.
No, and you can't get past his past. And look, it's a limited sample, right? The guy has started 10 playoff games in his career. He's played in 11, which is not a ton of games, but he's given up 4 more goals 6 times in those games. And he got tagged for 6 in game 1. And because of that pass, because, you start getting, 870 something save percentages and a 3-7 record, 3-6 record, whatever it is, until you answer that, until you start getting those numbers going back towards 900 and you get some more wins there. I mean, I think it's a little bit picks up momentum that there'll be more focus on that for Ullmark. I mean, everything Travis Green said is true. He did win a Vezina Trophy. He's been a fantastic goaltender for long stretches of his career, long stretches of this season. But, the Senators, he's more than just a player for the Senators. When you have, he was their big offseason acquisition. As you mentioned, he got the nice contract. He's going to be one of their better paid players. I mean, he has to be a difference maker. And that might mean at some point, and, outperforming Anthony Stolarz straight up. I mean, games aren't perfect. It's not going to be, if the Senators make this a series or end up winning the series, it's not because they probably outshot the Leafs every night. Now, it might be because the Leafs kind of play Berube hockey and don't take so many chances as they once did. And so they do get outshot more frequently than a lot of teams. But the point is that they might have to win a game on the Ottawa side of this where the Leafs dominate. But Ullmark is the one making the difference, where you're thinking of 2 or 3 outstanding saves he made that kept his team at bay, and then they were, opportunistic. And, I agree with a lot of what we've heard from the Senators about being really, stout at 5-on-5 in that game one. But the one bit I would quibble with is you still gave Mitch Marner a clear breakaway in the first period. Thomas Chabot took himself out of position to go play Scott Lawton. Now, I think he was expecting someone to come cover for him, but Oliver Ekman-Larsson ends up with that puck in the middle of the ice, skating downhill. And, that's a grade A opportunity. In the playoffs, you don't get a lot of those kind of looks. Now, the Senators did generate some of those, especially in the second period, the Tkachuk breakaway and a few chances that came after that. But, they had some breakdowns in that game. And, you're right. It's a bit chicken and egg. The goalie's allowed to stop some of the tough, saves as well. But it's not like Ullmark was letting them in from center, but he just didn't look steady. And he didn't have his best night, which he acknowledged. I'll give him credit for the way he came out after the game. Dress reporters, we were both in that scrum. You were asking him some of those questions. I mean, he didn't shy away from it all. He's kind of an offbeat guy. I don't know him personally, of course, but just getting a feel for him. I thought he handled that pretty well under the circumstances, what was obviously a tough game for him. But, at some point, someone's got to be writing a story about what a great night he had, or else I think it's going to be a tough series for Ottawa, just because, again, he's not just another piece of this team. I think he's a real core member of the Senators, and he didn't hold up his end of the bargain fully, but, again, he's not alone in that game.
Ullmark throughout this year has had to rebound from tough stretches. He had a muscle strain to start the year. Some of the games he played weren't great. They went through that 5-game slide in November where so many fans thought it was over. I know in talking to him, he had to look within himself with his own game. Like he was honest with me last week when we spoke, and he said that he found himself focusing a lot more on what his teammates did wrong versus what he did wrong, and he had to make the mental switch. He talked to other players about it. He talked to a team psychiatrist about it, and eventually, and also with his goalie coach, Justin Peters. And that kind of worked his way back up to playing well. And then obviously other injuries came into play. But I think he's been in situations before where he's had to rebound after tough stretches of play. There's time for him to do it again after a tough game one. So I'm not going to completely write off Linus Ullmark after one tough game. His record is his record, but we're going to be singing a completely different tune if Linus Ullmark steals game 2 or just balls out in game 2. So I think that's all I want to say with that.
I was going to say, and that's great stuff. I mean, I'm curious how long his leash is. Like, is the organization's approach going to be like, he's our guy, we're going down with him no matter what? Like, does he just keep rolling out there? Do they look at, the play of Levi Merlainen? Pardon my pronunciation if I got that a little wrong, but I know that he's a younger up and coming player, won them some games this year. I'm just curious if it doesn't go better in game 2, or, if that switch even comes into play. And the same thing will be said on the Toronto side of things. Stolarz and Joseph Woll split a lot of starts this year. Obviously, it's Stolarz' job right now, but if there's some tough nights ahead, I think that would be a fair question on that side. The Senators are set up where obviously Ullmark is very experienced goaltender, whatever, 300 NHL games. He's their guy, but I wonder what it will take to maybe make them rethink that. Probably getting ahead of myself by throwing it out there, but just something that was on my mind watching that game play out last night.
I mean, I'll say this, when I saw Levi Merlainen was called up ahead of the series, that definitely made my eyebrows perk up. And Travis Green was just saying, hey, we're allowed to do it, but it's within the rules. It would be quite something if the Senators, I know we're getting ahead of ourselves by talking about this, it would be quite something if they felt, we have to put our season in the hands of Levi Merlainen, which is funny because partway through the year, they kind of had to do that when Linus Ullmark was hurt and Anton Forsberg wasn't playing at 100%. It's a lot to do that for a young kid who's a part of their future, but we've seen it work out before. But I don't know. I still have confidence that Linus Ullmark is still the guy and can still at least make this a lot closer. I don't think he could play any worse than he played on Sunday night.
I'll say this. I'm putting my chips on we see Merlainen starting a game over Forsberg, if it comes to that. I'm saying,
I think
if they're starting anyone other than Ullmark, I think you go with the kid who has upside. I just think that's worked a lot over history rather than, kind of a career backup as Forsberg has been. And I'll say, your confidence, you've watched Ullmark play a lot more games than me up close and personal, but my confidence was a bit shaken in him watching the way that game one played out and just knowing that some of the history there. I do think that has to at least be in everyone's minds. And again, it's up to him to erase it from your mind. And one way he could do that by standing on his head further down the line in the series.
Any other takeaway you want to go through from this Leafs Sens series that we didn't pick up on? I know we bounced around a lot.
No, I'm sure we'll kick it around still. I mean, the Thursday episodes, there's only going to be one more game played, right? So, but the opener had a lot. It was a fun start to the series, and I always find the first game of a series a little bit hard. You don't have your head around the matchups necessarily. You haven't seen the painting start to get unfolded before your eyes. But now we have a few brush strokes on the canvas, and we'll get to see everything, the details filled in a little bit more. But I think it's going to be a very aggressive game too. I sense the Leafs are they got their dander up a little bit with some of the stuff that happened in that game. Again, none of it that I think is necessarily so egregious, but it feels like playoff hockey. And obviously if you're, the Senators, you're going to be desperate to put your best foot forward in that game. And I think they're not going to back down an inch from where they were in the opener.
Can't wait for game 2. That goes down Tuesday night, 7:30 start, not 7:30 start, okay, well, I'll live with the 30 minutes added extra for waiting time.
This episode of the Chris Johnston Show is brought to you by Peloton. Peloton has what you need to achieve your fitness goals, no matter why you got started. Whether you just want your cardio up, if you're going through a tough time in your life and you just want to be active, Peloton's the right place to start, I think. They've got 4-week strength building classes to running, indoor and outdoor workouts, and everything in between. Peloton will push you to achieve your goals. You can challenge yourself anywhere with Peloton's all access membership, where you can work out where you need to, like at home, outdoors, and you can take your favorite classes to the gym with the app. It's backed by thousands of members whose lives were changed. Peloton has thousands of members whose lives were changed by the workouts experience and their community. And Peloton can help you get stronger with strength classes, workout generators, and personalized programs on the Peloton Tread and Strength Plus app. Find your push. Find your power with Peloton at onepeloton.ca.
Any other playoff series from this past weekend catching your eye? Winnipeg and St. Louis, for example, doing battle. Carolina and New Jersey. Vegas and Minnesota did battle on the Sunday. Whole bunch of other different series in the works, of course. But what are some of the other matchups that have caught your attention?
The best game I watched on TV was the opening game, Winnipeg and St. Louis. I thought, obviously two teams that have done a lot of winning the last month or two. That are no strangers to each other. You had the Hellebuck storyline. He's another goaltender with tremendous numbers. I mean, as good as it gets in the regular season, but still some question marks with the playoffs. He lets in a couple goals that people are like, "Whoa, is he back?" And then obviously just, what an arena. I mean, I've expressed my affinity for going to games in Winnipeg before, but I just think the crowd met that moment. The Jets themselves, down 3-2 in that game, poured it on, found a way to tie it, found a way to win it in regulation. And that to me looks like a series really that could go, maybe it's distance, but two teams that came out swinging in game one and produced, I thought, probably the most exciting game maybe of the first ones we've seen. Now, we haven't even seen every series get going yet. It's a little premature to be giving out prizes for best game so far, but that was the one probably I would say I was most entertained by that I had a chance to watch.
Dallas and Colorado, too. I mean, we're expecting that series to be a barn burner. Seeing Dallas kind of get stomped in that first game. It's just funny because I think I saw some Dallas players say that was probably some of the best hockey they'd played in a couple months, but still, just with the way Colorado's been going, too, like that's a wagon over there.
Yeah, and some of the injury news isn't going great for the Stars. And look, teams, you got to play through that sometimes. And we've seen teams with kind of lineups that they didn't have all season sometimes truck through the playoffs and find a way to extend things out. But Heiskanen being out for the Stars, it's a real swing in how that series stacks up, just with the minutes he plays, the way he can, chew up those minutes and not allow too much to happen negatively for the Stars when he's on the ice. He's out as well for game 2. Sounds like maybe Gabriel Landeskog could be back, might be making his long awaited return, at least to the NHL ice. So look, that series, I would say the same in the Toronto-Ottawa one. I almost throw the score out a little bit, some of the circumstances out. I don't think it means one team's going to dominate over the other necessarily. Now, look, that could still happen. I don't have all the official results written down in front of me here, but I will say that I expect the Stars to find a way to even that series. They're on home ice. I mean, going back to Denver down 0-2 just feels like something you really, really can't do. So the Stars have had a lot of playoff success the last few years. They beat Colorado out. I know that the Avalanche have bulked up, but I still think there's a lot of hockey still to be played between those teams in this series.
Of the postseason series that haven't started as we're recording, so think Edmonton, LA, Washington, Montreal, Tampa Bay, Florida, which series are you looking forward to the most?
Tampa Bay, Florida is the one I'm looking forward the most. I'm just curious what Florida has. They've had so many injury issues and try to bring guys back in. I just wonder what they can make that series look like. But those are two teams, in theory, if they are healthy and they get to a certain level, we know they can win the Stanley Cup. So I think that's one to watch. Any series with Connor McDavid in it and Leon Draisaitl in their primes, I'm probably overthinking it by not naming them first. But, I'm certainly curious about that one. And if, some of the growth we've seen in LA as a defensive team and frankly, some of the weaknesses that have popped into the Oilers game that weren't there, they're not as good on the defensive side of the puck this season. The goaltending, hasn't been at the same level. Can they overcome that is pretty intriguing. And then, for the Montreal, Washington, I'm waiting for game 3 at the Bell Center. I just think that'll be a cool environment. And, the Canadians are playing with house money, really. I mean, of all the teams in this playoffs, I think they have absolutely the least to lose. But that being said, of course, they want to win the round. They want to go on a run. And so we'll see what kind of series they can make out of that. But I'd say I'd go in that order: Battle of Florida, then Edmonton, LA. But it doesn't mean, look, I'll be watching game 1 tonight of the Montreal Washington series as well.
Oh yeah, we'll find ways to watch all of these games as best as we can, in between the series we're both covering. Okay, there are some news and notes we should get to. We should start out in Vancouver. The Vancouver Canucks came out today with Patrick Allvin and Jim Rutherford speaking to the media. Rick Tocchet's future very much up in the air. Jim Rutherford saying that they will not exercise the option on Rick Tocchet's contract, but the hope is that Tocchet stays with the organization. Where are we at with Rick Tocchet and the Vancouver Canucks?
Well, basically, the deal is this. The team held the team option. They had until 48 hours after the season to exercise it. It would have basically, I don't know what the figure is, but it would have locked him in at a certain salary that was pre-agreed upon just for next season and then made him a free agent next summer. Now, the explanation that Jim Rutherford provided for not exercising that was that they don't want to force anyone to be part of their organization, potentially against their will. They would rather, they really like the job Rick Tocchet has done. He won the Jack Adams last season. Jim Rutherford mentioned that he felt he did no worse job and his staff did no worse job this season, but were dealt a different hand. Obviously, the JT Miller, Elias Pettersson situation, probably chief among the distractions or complications that existed for the Canucks this season. And so they want to keep him longer term. And the way Jim Rutherford characterized it was that they basically have put an offer on the table that's, well beyond what any Canucks coach in recent history has been paid, that they're stretching themselves to a level that they typically don't go to try to keep him. And they're waiting to hear what Rick Tocchet is going to do. Now, in the meantime, that gives Rick and his agent maybe a chance to think, openly about things. Sounds like there's been some pretty good dialogue within the Canucks organization, not just on this issue, but about the ways they have to find improvements, what they're looking for this offseason, how they make sure this sort of year where nothing went right isn't repeated in any way. And so, Tocchet's had that experience. Now he can mull on this offer and frankly, probably get a feel for what's going on around the league, because we've had a number of coaching vacancies open up here, right? Greg Cronin was fired in Anaheim since we last recorded. Peter Laviolette by the Rangers. You still have Philadelphia, Boston, Chicago, with vacancies to fill on a full-time basis after finishing the season with interim head coaches. There's going to be other openings too. You wonder, some rumblings out there. Maybe Seattle could be looking at a change. I think Tocchet has to. It's not to suggest he wants any or all of those jobs. It's just I think he's got to decide what's best for he and his family. And so, the ball is really in his court. The Canucks could not have been more clear, at least the way I understand things, that they would love to keep him. And, he's got to decide where he wants to go next. And we just don't know right now, what that's going to look like.
Any idea on timeline on when he might make a decision?
I would think within a week or so, for a couple reasons. Obviously, Vancouver has to get on to finding its next coach. But also, if he's walking away, essentially, he's going to want to get working, get interviewing for another job. I don't think he's walking away to take next season off. It would be, to presumably pursue work somewhere else. And so, there's not a lot of time to waste, I guess you might put it. It's crazy to me, really, that the carousel's swinging more than I thought. Maybe it would, just because there was a lot of coaching changes last year, just a year ago, right? So you think that maybe, usually coaches get 2 years at least, but there's a lot of moving parts in the coaching world right now, and so I don't think he has too long to make a decision, and it's either he stays or he's on the open market.
What did you think about the rest of that press conference, particularly when Jim Rutherford discussed doing everything he could to keep Quinn Hughes around in the fold for the Vancouver Canucks?
He was very honest. For some people's liking, maybe too honest, because, he said the quiet part out loud, which is that they don't know, with some of the turnover they've had, with where the organization's going, with, it seems Brock Besser likely walking out the door as a free agent this summer. Obviously, they already traded JT Miller. They're in a bit of a transitional phase, what Quinn Hughes is going to want to do. And, I wonder if Jim Rutherford was stepping on the line of tampering by mentioning, he said he wants to play with his brothers. For those uninitiated, that would mean Jack and Luke Hughes, who play for the New Jersey Devils, are under contract to the New Jersey Devils. And, Jim said, if he wants to go play with them, there's nothing we can do. Maybe we can trade for them. I don't think he meant any harm by saying that. I don't actually believe he's trying to ruffle the bushes and cause waves, but that's the kind of comment that wouldn't be received well in the league's head office. You can't, the rules are pretty clear. You can't talk about players under contract elsewhere in that kind of manner. So, I give them in Vancouver, it's always I find it's like a place where you get very honest and refreshing press availabilities like that. I like the way they're speaking to their fan base, but that might be one instance where Jim Rutherford could go back. He might not have said everything he said out loud about the Hughes situation. And certainly he left the door open. Look, Quinn's still got a couple years left on his contract, but when that's up, he is an unrestricted free agent. He's the captain of the team. They love the guy. They're going to offer him whatever fair market is for an elite defenseman at that time. I'm sure he's going to have that chance to sign that kind of contract. But, Jim Rutherford was pretty clear there that he's not sure if Quinn Hughes is going to be of a mind to stay when it comes to that point in time down the road.
Man, just hearing that, and I know I'm going off of a clip, and I wasn't at that press conference, but just knowing how antsy that fan base gets, just hearing that possibility, just hearing Quinn Hughes discussed in that way, if I was a fan, I would just feel extremely anxious about that. This was a team that showed promise and did what it could in the playoffs last year, and now you're out JT Miller. Elias Pettersson is not the same player he was at least last year, and you're wondering about the future of Quinn Hughes in this organization. Can you just put a stop on things? It feels like the roller coaster just keeps going, and you keep revving up in speed, and there's no brakes to kind of slow stuff down. That's what it feels like, and I'm an outsider.
They've got a lot of work to do in Vancouver. They need a second-line center. They need to replace essentially what JT Miller used to do. I know they got Philip Hedl in that deal, and unfortunately he ended the season with a concussion again, which has been part of his history. But, if Besser walks out the doors, that's another 25 goals gone. I mean, they need to bolster their scoring ranks. I think, short term, like in the near future, might not be the best summer to do that or the easiest place to do that. So, it's a big summer ahead, and there's probably more questions than answers right now. I mean, that's another takeaway from that press conference at large is just, I think they recognize that they took a major step back this season, and it's no guarantee that it does veer back in the positive direction. I mentioned how it's almost like amazing year, bad year, amazing year, bad year. Well, they've got to get a lot of work done to make sure it's an amazing year after this bad year.
100%. Looking elsewhere, you mentioned the coaching changes in New York and with Anaheim. What are you hearing about what could be next for both of those teams?
Well, in Anaheim, they really want to make the playoffs next season. And it's funny. They took, I believe, the second best year-over-year improvement in points from last season to this season. And so you would think that would bode well for Greg Cronin, but I think that there was just some doubts there from the organization about him being able to take that young team to the next level. And so that's how you get that coaching change after just 2 years for him and his staff with the Ducks. I think that's going to be a highly coveted job in a lot of ways. Obviously a nice place in the world to live, but I mean, Anaheim, I know it's been a while since the Ducks were kind of, I guess a going concern in the NHL, I'd call them, but they have stockpiled a lot of young players there. And, I think if you look at the back half of the season in particular, for the Leo Carlsons, for McTavish, for some of their main players really had a lot of encouraging signs. They won a lot of games. Quite frankly, if you look at their power play and penalty killing, we're both near the bottom of the league. Like, given that they didn't finish so far out of the mix in the West, I mean, there was a world that they left enough points on the table just with some of their special teams deficiencies. That's one of the reasons that they didn't, make it more interesting in the playoff chase. So that's a way of setting up the fact, I think, that they're ready to take another step, and it's going to be, someone else's job to do so. It's still too soon to say that will be. I don't get the feeling that they have one, person in mind to be that coaching spot, but, I think experienced coaches will view that as a positive place to take a job when it comes time for them to hire. The Rangers have their own soap opera this year, but, you still can't get past the fact it's New York. It's an original six team. It's a big spending organization. It's a marquee place to work, even though it comes with its challenges as, basically all the coaches, Peter Laviolette can now tell you, David Quinn could have told you that. It's been, it's a tough place to do business, but I think that they will be in line for a first-class candidate. They might, the Rangers to me are a team that might want to wait until the first round's over just to see if any teams that go out in round one that have experienced coaches, very, well-tenured coaches, maybe if there's, a change after a first-round playoff loss, I could see that kind of coach ending up with the Rangers. At this point in time on day three, the morning of day three of the playoffs, I can't tell you who's going to lose in round one, which coach. I'm not nodding at anyone in particular, but I do think, that there's some high stress for some of these teams, right? That there's a lot of expectations to win. And if a team loses in round one, as we saw with Sheldon Keefe last year in Toronto, sometimes that does cost you a job. So, the Rangers, a lot of parallels with Vancouver, kind of funny in hindsight that they hooked up on that trade for JT Miller, and in that deal. But, they two teams that I don't know how quickly they can get back to being where they were, but certainly finished well below where most expected this season. And that's why you're talking about the changes we're discussing here.
All right, we'll keep an eye out for the coaching carousel as it turns throughout the week, CJ. I think with that, unless we're missing anything else, I think we can get to questions for Ask CJ, as it is a Monday. So you ready for some questions?
Let's do it. I'm already at the point, just days into the playoffs, I don't know what day of the week it is.
The fact that it's a Monday, there was a game yesterday. I know there's a game tomorrow.
Holiday weekend, too. Holiday weekend.
It's tripping me up. It's tripping me up, man. I'm with you. Anyway, we'll find a way to make this work. Let's go through some of these questions that we have here. From Alex Howe, I know we kind of went in on Linus Ullmark, but Alex Howe would like to know how short the leash is on Linus Ullmark going forward. I think the fact that we had that discussion and kind of jumping into it with, hey, if it gets to the point where they look at their backups, I don't know. I still think there's confidence in him. I still don't think they jump so far as to go away from him. I think it would have to take a catastrophically bad game 2 for the Senators to say, you know what, man, we have to go in a different direction.
But for me, that's actually where basically the line is drawn, though. Like if game 2, if he gets lit up again, I don't think you can wait until after game 3 to make that change, because by then it might be too late if you go down 0-3. So if they go down 0-2, even going home, and it's another one-sided score, or a night where you just have some questions about a few of the goals that get by them. If it's 4 or 5 or 6 again, and the storyline is similar to what we saw after game 1, I think you make the change for game 3. To me, that's because it gives the other goalie a chance to come in, maybe to change the momentum, and then there's still an opportunity to go back to Ullmark later on if you want to. I don't see it as a permanent change in this case, just given the other personnel. But game 2 is massive. It cannot be overstated for Ullmark in particular. I think to start pushing back against this narrative, and also on some levels, crazy as it might sound, to keep a hold of his own crease.
Next question from Jer. Do the whistles go away after Travis Green's post-game comments? I assume they are implying the comments that Travis said about how the Leafs did a good job of selling some of those calls that led to penalties.
Well, history tells me the whistles always go away at some point during the playoffs. They don't send around a memo saying, okay, tonight's the night that the calls stop. But I mean, look, it is what it is. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I know there's been a fair number of penalty calls in the early playoff games. We've seen quite a number of power play goals. Usually as it goes along, it's maybe a little bit of the players adapting to the standard, but it's also the referees, I think, not wanting to dictate the game in a sense. They don't want to decide the game. And so I don't know that anyone will be reacting at all directly to what Travis Green said or didn't say, or Craig Berube, but it wouldn't surprise me to see, less than 8 total power plays in game 2. That's a lot for the playoffs. Frankly, that's a lot for down the stretch in the regular season. Watched a lot of nights where it's like 1 apiece or 2 apiece. Look, we saw the Four Nations tournament, which I realize is not the exact same thing as the Stanley Cup playoffs, but there was barely any penalties called in that tournament at all. So I think that's far more likely where the standard or where the line ends up being in this playoffs, but we're still a couple days in here. So, everyone's finding out that where the familiar ground is. But I think when push comes to shove, you won't see very many teams getting 6 power plays in a game the way the Leafs did in game 1.
Sandra wants to know, have the wheels already fallen off the Sens, or will they change their tactics from Tasmanian Devil to Bugs Bunny for game 2? That is a uniquely answered or posed question.
Well, you're the Sens expert far more than me. I mean, what's your feel on that? Like a little Bugs Bunny in there, or what?
I mean, when I think Bugs Bunny, I think crafty, maybe a little bit more measured compared to a Tasmanian Devil where you're just trying to destroy everything moving. Just kind of what we mentioned before about how they felt they were so good at 5-on-5. It's all about them managing the game and keeping it there and finding ways to get to the front of the net. That I had a bigger concern with more than anything else. I know they were able to get some quality slot chances near the end of the game. At the start, I was a little bit concerned at the lack of that. And I think Brady Tkachuk also has to be a huge part of them generating those chances at the net front as well. So I think the look from Tasmanian Devil to Bugs Bunny, I understand where Sandra's getting at here. I think they can do it.
Well, it's the most hotly contested piece of real estate on the ice, especially in the playoffs, right? And what is one area that the Leafs have significantly changed their team from a year ago? It would be the blue line. And even just adding guys like Brandon Carlo, signing Oliver Ekman-Larsson, Jake McCabe's been here a couple of years ago. Obviously, Chris Tanev was a big offseason signing. They feel that they, being the Leafs, better equipped to keep things to the outside. The guys I mentioned block a lot of shots. What's interesting from the Toronto end of that game 1 is they're able to play those defensemen pretty steady minutes. Like there's not a huge gap between the Leafs 1, 2, and third pair in that first game. I think that they're comfortable sort of spreading it out, which, especially over the length of the playoffs, I think could benefit them. If they're able to play long enough, that could be a positive factor. I don't know though if the Sens have Bugs Bunny or Tasmanian Devil energy. I don't know what to make of the specific question, other than to say I do think the Sens are going to try to get the Leafs off their game, to create distractions, to get them preoccupied with things they probably shouldn't be preoccupied with. And I think they should do that. I don't think that's a perfectly sensible game plan, as long as you can do it without taking too many penalties.
Were you a Looney Tunes guy at all growing up?
No. I mean, I remember seeing it, but I didn't watch a lot of Looney Tunes.
So like Space Jam? I mean, I
watched Space Jam back in the day.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know that's not, that's an extension of Looney Tunes, but that I don't know why that's the first thing that comes to mind. I mean, Michael Jordan, 90s. You're a 90s kid. 90s
kid, essentially. I was born in the 80s, but I don't really have conscious memories of the 80s, but I certainly remember the 90s.
Absolutely. One more for you from Benito. Were you as impressed as I was that Max Domi didn't swing until the last minute? Those Sens were doing their best to goad him into a Leafs first round suspension.
Yeah, actually. I mean, one thing, we saw Max take some penalties last year in the first round. I mean, no one questions where his level of commitment is at. Obviously, quite literally grew up in the Leafs family. His dad, Ty, had a long run with the Leafs. He was around the team as a kid, skated on the ice. You don't have to Google too many searches to find pictures of him with Matt Sundin or other Leafs legends on the ice. He's put out his own hype videos on IG, kind of clapping between eras, what his dad went through and what he went through. But I think for Max, it is a relevant conversation of channeling that energy in a positive way. He played very well for the Leafs, I should say, in last year's playoffs, and has sort of found his game quietly, I'd say, in the last few weeks, and is at a good spot now. But, part for him is, maybe it could be a fight if that's what it takes, but getting in, mixing things up a little bit, but, not putting the Leafs shorthanded either. So I would say it was a good first night for Toronto on that account. I didn't think anyone got too carried away, didn't get distracted, but look, it's a very real conversation in the Leafs dressing room about continuing to do that, because human nature is what it is. And the more these teams play, the more maybe it's certain individuals on the other side do things that tick you off, the more likely it is someone's going to snap or make a decision, see red. I mean, it's an emotional game. That's what makes the playoffs great. And Domi could be one of those players, I would say, on the Toronto side. So he's got to keep it between the whistles, but he did a good job on game one, I thought.
All right, that's going to do it for all the questions we've got for Ask CJ. Thank you to everyone who sent them on X, Blue Sky, and on Discord. We'll be back on Thursday with a new episode of The Chris Johnston Show as we continue our coverage of the Battle of Ontario and the Stanley Cup playoffs. Great work as always, CJ. Check out his work at The Athletic, and we'll be back again on Thursday. Peace.
Stay hydrated, buddy. You need it in the playoffs.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.